Good morning. My name is Jonathan Douglas. I am director of a UK charity called the National Literacy Trust. And it is a great privilege and pleasure to pick up the themes which Professor O'Sullivan introduced around translation and international audiences for children's literature, and take them forward in a discussion with Aidan Chambers and Bart Moeyaert. It's traditional, isn't it, to say neither of them need an introduction, but I will attempt a very short introduction for both. Aidan Chambers, perhaps through three areas, has made an incredible contribution to books for children and children's reading. The first is as a creator of a body of texts which have entranced children and young people for the past perhaps 2 generations. The second is through leading a discourse around the value of children's literature and leading also the discussion of critical appraisal of children's literature. And the third is through his work looking at effective classroom practice and practice in libraries and the way in which those of us who work on a professional basis to support children's reading can take our activities forward. And in recognition of his work, he is a winner of the Hans Christian Andersen Award. Bart Moeyaert is one of the most extraordinary voices in European writing for young people that I've encountered. Having published his first book at the age of 19, gosh, such extraordinary talent. His books have now been translated into 25 languages, and he was shortlisted this year for the Hans Christian Andersen Award. Congratulations. I want to start off by picking up a theme which Professor Sullivan introduced, which is the fact that both of these amazing writers for young people have actually got more interest in translation than simply having their own works translated. And I wanted to ask Aidan, first of all, to just reflect on his experience of having led the creation of a list of translated works for young people, and perhaps explain how that impacted on your writing for young people yourself.
Thank you, Jonathan. I should say, first of all, I'm monolinguistic. I can only read and write English. And I'm mildly dyslexic, which is part of the reason why I can't learn another language. So I'm very aware that almost all the reading I do that matters to me is actually in translation. In other words, I'm a great fan of the Russian novel, and I cannot read it in Russian. My view is that my life is expanded by other people's lives that are different from mine, as well as by those writers who write my own life so that I can understand it myself. So the great English writers tended to have identified me for myself, and those writers in translation give me another view of other people. And I wanted that for children. I was scandalized by the lack of translation of children's books into English. So try to do something about it. I won't go on for long because we don't have much time. What I discovered is 2 things. One, the things that Emma were talking about are absolutely a pressure on you the whole time. Secondly, that within the European languages, which is the only ones I could explore, there are amazing texts that are so different from the English that it is a scandal we don't have them. Then I discovered, of course, all the things that Emma talked about, that is, translations don't sell. They do. They sell just as well as most modest English language books. That was something I discovered. The problem with it is that you need, if you are monolinguistic, and can't therefore read the original book in its own language, you need someone who can understand that language and is sympathetic with you, who can be, if you like, yourself as the person who reads the other language. And so whenever I translated or published a translation from another language, there was a first language speaker alongside me who monitored what the translator had done. And then I discovered that translators do some very strange things. I will just mention one. First, let me say that I agree with Ema that translators are the great unsung heroes and heroines of all literature. And I admire what they do. So having said that, I can tell you what they do badly. What worries me is that there is an instinct in the translator to translate into the new language in such a way that it flattens out anything that is peculiar in the original language. Let me give you one example. This comes from Milan Kundera, who writes about the translation of Kafka. And he points out that Kafka, in his language, will repeat the same word a number of times in a sentence and in a paragraph. And that what English translators tend to do is not to repeat the same word, but to look for synonyms for the word, because the English don't like repetition. They think it's bad writing. So the translator is afraid that if, it's usually she, by the way, translates accurately in the sense of repeating the same word, she will be thought to have translated badly by the people who don't know that host language. That happens all the time. What the person who knew the language working with me could do would be to tell me that that is what is happening, and then I could reinstate what should have been there. So on it goes. The one thing I will then say is that in English, British publishing of translation, it will work if a large publisher, like Random House and Penguin, make a corner of their list which is deliberately meant for translation and presents it as translation and promotes it as translation. Then it would work. There's a lot more to say, but that's enough for now.
And Bart, your experience is very different because both Aidan and I are monolinguistic. However, you come from a cultural context where, well, I've got a fantastic quote from you. Describing Belgium, you say, his upper torso speaks Dutch, his nether regions speak French, and his arse speaks German. So that monolinguistic framework which we operate in isn't really an option. Do you want to talk a bit about your experience of translation and your active role as a translator?
It's very important to know that when I give a lecture, I like to stand on a chair and show my country. I'll do it just shortly. I do like this because my country is looking like a man that stands like this. His legs have a different language as this part, and my bum is, well, German. And that's important. It's not only a joke. People always say, oh, it's not very literary when you stand on a chair like that. But I think it's very important because it says something about my country and where I live. I live in the middle. I live in my shoulder, in Antwerp, in a city, in a harbor where a lot of people come together, where a lot of different people come together with different languages. I live in the neighborhood of the station, where people are searching their way into Antwerp. And I take it as an advantage to say, can I help? Est-ce que je peux vous aider? Kan ik etwas doen? And I don't think it's very difficult to make that click, because I want to show that my city, who is rather right-winged, so to speak, is open. And that's something that's, well, a part of me. You have to know the second thing that Aidan created me. I changed completely in a way. Well, I discovered myself completely when I was 19, published the first novel. And at the same time, I met Aidan through his work. I wanted to make a big work on the school where I was, the high school where I was, studying German and history. I wanted to make a work about Dance on My Grave. And the Catholic school said, Dance on My Grave, it's about two boys, that's very special. And they said, the only thing you can do is make a work about his work, his oeuvre. And that's where I discovered that that's a word I miss once in a while here. that an author has to be an author, or a writer has to be a writer, has to be somebody. Why Aidan is in the Dutch-speaking part in Belgium and the Netherlands that successful is not only because of his books, but because the translation had brought a man to our country with a vivid idea about reading, about writing. And thank God that he's translated, which is important. He changed me in sitting on my chair, not only standing on my chair, and being somebody, no, that's my idea. Isn't it okay? I will change something if you want to, but I will not if you ask me to. I have to think myself and to change myself. And that's it. At that time, I had a publisher. I changed publishing houses, and this man said, your love for language can be made bigger and broader if you translate. And he gave me a book, Der Neue Pinocchio, of Christina Nostlinger, to translate. I was in Italy translating this book, and I adore it when I'm surrounded by language that I don't really understand. Well, I can order a pizza, but that's all. And put that language on the page in my language, in the Dutch, in the Flemish language. I adore it not as a game, but as making myself, I just say bigger here inside. I remember about translation, but it just says something. I was in Osaka for a lecture tour, and I went into this big, very huge store, and I had my bag with me with GM Coetzee, Disgrace, in my bag. That was the only Dutch thing, well, a translation that I had in my bag. I was very happy about Coetzee, well, in Dutch. And I'm there on this floor where computers are sold. And I always only see these signs, red signs, beautifully written, but I couldn't read a word. And that was the moment I decided, look at me, I'm just my language. I have my language with me. I can read one book, the richness of it. I am my language in this place where I cannot read anything. So when to come to the translation work, I make the choice, if I can have the choice, to translate a book or not. I have to like the book. I have to like it completely. I have to get in touch with the voice, as I want to be in touch with a human being. If I dislike you, I will not write a mail to you. That's very normal. If I like you very much, I will keep in contact because I like your ideas. We have a sense of thinking together or being together. Same thing with a book. The only thing I was telling to a Danish translator yesterday, where I was talking with, for the past few years I thought, Bart, you're not right. You aren't a translator. You are an author, a writer, translating books, and that's a difference. You take a job from a real translator. Don't do that. And they are, I presume, better in it. I can do as if I'm a translator, but I'm not.
One of the themes you've just touched on is very interesting, because what you're suggesting is that because of translation, I mean, Ima used the word ambassador previously, but children's authors and writers for young people, in effect, take on an international ambassadorial role. And I suppose a question to you, Aidan, is are you comfortable with that role? Is that something which you feel is appropriate, being a spokesperson for children, for young people's reading internationally? Or do you feel it's a bit of a distraction from the core purpose?
Do you mean, am I nervous of it as a person rather than a writer?
As a writer and as a person, yes.
As a person, I'm very nervous of it. I'm worried when I'm invited to go to another country and talk about children and reading, because that is so culturally determined.
Yes.
And when I don't even know the language of that country, I feel I have no right to start pontificating about what should be done. But I never go anywhere unless I'm invited to work there. So the only way I see other places is by being invited to work. So I pretend not to be embarrassed and go and do it. As a writer, I'm sorry, I have a frog. I don't think like that at all. Maybe I can make one point. What Emma was talking about was, let me put it this way, child-specific. Everything was devoted to what the child needed, what the child was given, what the child might be able to cope with. It is as though it were all that children's books were, in some sense, about education and about acculturalizing. And that's fine. I don't have any disagreement with that. It's necessary. But the history of children's literature, children's writing for children, has moved from the didactic in England in the 18th century to teach them good manners, to teach them about religion, to teach them about things they should know, to teach them about moral things. They were didactic. We've shifted. There are those of us who think of it as a literature, which happens to be a literature which is written within the consciousness of a child or the consciousness of a young adult, of what I call a youth. This is what makes it different from what we might call adult literature. And in the writing of that, at least in my experience, and I suspect probably in Bart's, I do not think about the reader at all at the time of writing. I am not writing to a reader. Frankly, I couldn't care less at that moment about the reader. What I'm doing is creating a text. That text, in my case, is a story. The story has to deal with those people in the story, whether they're children, adults, or young adults. But what I'm creating is an object. Whether that object is then appreciated by anybody else, whatever their age, has nothing to do with me, not as an author. That has to do with you. In all literature, there is a mediator between the author and the book and the people who read it. They're often called reviewers or critics or marketing people. It is their job to take a book to readers, whoever those readers may be. It is the reader's job to find out what that book wants from you. In other words, we make a mistake now, chronically, badly, of talking a lot about how unless the child likes this book, it is no use to us. That is, we have become so concerned about reader reception, what the reader thinks, that we are forgetting the primary thing about all art. It is a created object, and the greater it is, the more the recipient will have to do, the more work we will have to do to find out what that object wants us to do with it. Do you see the point I'm making? So for me, as a youth writer, I'm not a children's writer, I can't write children's books. I have no sense of childhood. I am totally a 16 and 17 and 19-year-old person still. I write like that because I'm that. I am trying to write at the moment a book which is the poetics of youth literature. If there is such a thing as youth literature, it must have a poetics. There must be an aesthetic content which makes it what it is and makes it different from all other forms of literature. Now, I don't know whether it actually exists. I am writing the book to find out if it exists. I'm calling it the age between, because adolescence, as we usually call it, is the age between childhood and mature adulthood. And it is a particular time of life. Psychologically, we know a lot about it. Sociologically, we know a lot about it. There is a literature, in my view, which is of that state. And I'm trying to find out what it is I think I've been doing for the last 40 years. What is it that I have written, and what has it become? So the appeal I'm making to you, I think, which is, aside from translation, but it's my passion. Let us keep on regarding what is written in the name of children as something that can be an object which is literary. Everybody will be better off for that. It is not simply a marketing device. It is not simply a didactic, in the most narrow terms, educational device. It is an art device, at least in the sense that I'm trying to do it. Sorry for that, it was a long lecture.
If I can ask Bart to respond to that, because at the very heart of what Aidan just said was a relationship between a logocentric, a view of literature which places the emphasis on the creation and the word, and a tendency to focus on reader reception. And it seems that actually the challenge for the translator sits at the heart of that. Yeah. And I suppose in your experience as a translator, where did you try and sit on the fence? Do you try and negotiate a text which is accessible culturally for the reader, or do you try to represent authentically the cultural creation of the writer, even if it is culturally distant from the reader's cultural experience? Where do you sit on that kind of...
You know Madonna?
Not personally.
She sings, "Time goes by so slowly." Yeah. And when people say stupid things to me, I always chant this little song. Time goes by so slowly, thinking you don't know what you're saying. Think twice, think twice. And I mean with that I always try to be in another corner. If they say, you're a children's book writer, writing for children, I'll say, yes. You're a writer, yes. Always right, but people think twice. That's what I like about what Aidan says. Think twice. It's not just a book for children. Yeah. So when we come to translating or the translated book, I never will adapt a book for children. I will adapt a voice. I remember seeing Cría Cuervos of Saura, a movie, a Spanish movie. I was 8 or 10, something like that. And I was completely overwhelmed by what happened in that movie. Little girl living between women in the time of Franco, the regime of Franco. And I didn't had a clue what it was about, but it was about this loneliness of this girl. And I was, in a way, lonely. I'm the youngest of 7 brothers, but you can be lonely with 7 brothers anyhow. But that movie, well, I still remember that sense of that movie, how I looked at it. So it's important to have that voice of that movie with me, even when I'm 84 or 48, whatever. Yeah. You have to, I can't say it in a different way. The book is what counts, the artistic thing, the literature that's there on the page.
Yeah. Aidan, returning to what you've just said, and also thinking about your latest book, Dying to Know You, which is an extraordinary achievement. The narrator in that is a writer approaching the end of his career, and he takes on a translating role, in effect, for a young person who's challenged by his girlfriend to put his thoughts down in words. And it seems to be that you're suggesting that actually every writer who writes about youth as an adult is, in effect, a translator. That they are taking on something which they don't belong to, and placing it down on paper for potentially for an audience which they're not part of.
Whenever you're writing anything that is a story, you're having to do what I think Bart is talking about in translation, and which I would hope translators do. You have to be inhabited by the central character of the book. You have to become that person. Actors know this. Actors know how to do this when they are performing. You know, if you're going to play, if you're going to play Hamlet, Hamlet has to inhabit you. But the Hamlet who inhabits you is the Hamlet you would be. So you have to find your Hamlet. But it has to be Shakespeare's words that you are using to get the inhabitation. Now, a novelist is doing the same thing with the character. I don't know how it is for Bart, but for me, a character comes to me first just as ordinary people do, by sight. They're there, you're looking at them, and they are doing things even before they say anything. And you have to fall in love with them if you're going to write about them, even if they're horrible. You know, I think Shakespeare must have been in love with Macbeth. You couldn't write Macbeth without being sympathetic with that character and inhabiting you. So Macbeth is Shakespeare being awful. This is Shakespeare being horrible. He could be like that. Remember, we could all be Hitler. Hitler wasn't mad. Hitler was a perfectly sane, sincere person. It was the sincerity that was so awful. He really believed it. We can all be that. Every one of us can be everything it's possible for a human being to be, whether male or female, old or young. And as a writer, what happens in my experience, I can only talk about myself, is that character becomes somebody I can't get rid of. They inhabit me. My longest book is called This Is All, and almost all of it is written by a girl of 19. That girl inhabited me for 5 years, but she is what I would be if I were her. It's my girl. I am Cordelia, but she's not me. It's a strange condition to be in. I don't think it's rare. It's not mystical. Everybody does it. Writers just happen to do it and write it down. Now, in the case of Dying to Know You, which you were kind enough to refer to, the central character is an old man of 75 who happens to be a writer, and the other central character is a young man of 18 who is dyslexic and can't write what his girlfriend requires him to write, and he hasn't told her that he's dyslexic because he's afraid of what she'll think of him. Therefore, he comes to the writer asking him to write down what he can't write down. And as Jonathan says, that writer is interpreting the boy Carl. He's translating him. So that when you're reading the book, what you're getting is the writer's view of Carl, not Carl's view of Carl. So it's actually a metaphor of what goes on in the writing of any novel. It's actually happening on the page in the story, as the writer writes what the boy wants him to write, which then, of course, has total disaster, because when the reader reads it and finds out the writer's written it and not the boy, she's very upset. So that the same thing happens with readers of books. Now, I did it because I had never come across a youth book in which an old person was as centrally important as the young person. But why shouldn't they be? Young people are talking to old people all the time. Old people are talking to young people all the time. Why do we have to make a separation? The worst novel I know of in this regard is Catcher in the Rye, which I regard as an objectionable book. I think it's a scandalously bad book. I will tell you why if you want to, but this is a book in which all mature understanding of the world has been screened out of the book. all you're getting is what really is a short story of a character who hates the world. That's scandalous because that's not how it is. I've known many kids who are in states of dislike of the world. They don't totally hate it. They don't totally hate every adult. This is a scandalous view of life. It's brilliantly done. Salinger catches the voice absolutely rightly. The book to compare it with is Huckleberry Finn. Huckleberry Finn is supposed to be a 14-year-old boy who is uneducated, criminal in some respects. He thieves, he lies. He's wonderful. He is Hamlet at 14. No 14-year-old boy like Huck could ever have even told that story, never mind written it. Yet we believe he could. Why? Because Mark Twain captured that boy absolutely in his voice, in his way of thinking, in his consciousness, and then did something that every true author does. Twain's, he was about 54, he was in his 50s when he wrote it. All his experience of life as a mature adult, he gave to Huck in a way that Huck could have said it. No boy could have said it. Only Huck Finn says it. And when a boy of 14 like me reads Huck Finn, he can think it. That's what art does. It allows you to think that which you are not yet able to think, and makes you believe that the character thinking it, who you think is like you, could have done it. And if that character could have done it, you can do it. That makes you larger. That's what literature's about.
My last question to Bart and Aidan is about the flip side of what we're talking about, because we're talking about a very positive experience of literature in translation, which is about growing, which is about development of empathy, understanding of different cultural perspectives. But there is another issue as well, which is that any act of translation is an overt political act. It is about saying, it's a cultural statement. And in as much as it can be a positive, therefore, I presume it can be a negative. So I suppose my final question is, we're a very positive group of people dedicated to children's literature, but what are the dangers associated with translation? What are your fears around it?
I get all the translation questions.
He's going to get it as well, don't worry.
Now, please, Aidan, start, because I don't have...
You should talk about yourself, because that's really what it's about. I'll try to be quick. It is a political act. All making of artworks is a political act, because there's an ideology there, even if you don't know it. If you're not aware of it, it's still there. Every time you write a story which is on the edge of the taboo, that which is not supposed to be spoken about, it's a political act. Every time you write that there should be some kind of equality, it's a political act. So it's always a political act. My fear is this. I will make it specific to my own books. Very, very rarely does a translator ask me any questions. There are passages in my books which even fluent English speakers find difficult to interpret because of the nuances of the language and the references in them. They have to be explained. If they have to be explained to a fluent English writer, how can I trust a translator translating that into another language who must regard herself as so good at the English language, she doesn't need to ask me any questions about it? Do you see what I'm saying? That's the thing that worries me. When when Bart read Down to My Grave in Dutch, I guess, what was he reading? There's a passage in Down to My Grave that is so coded that English people can't understand it. They can read it, but they can't understand it. In the Dutch, the translator has made total nonsense of it. Never asked me, what the hell is going on in this passage? What did you mean in this passage? That's what worries me.
Bart, you've said something similar in as much as you've said once that you felt you were the plaything of translators. We're here for you to play with, you said. So, I mean, do you have similar concerns?
Concerns, yes, but when I work together to make a theater play, or I ask an illustrator, I really want that illustrator, so I ask that person, like Wolf Elbroek or Rotrot Susanne Berner, I ask her or he, because I trust them. I think they are artists. There is a trilogy made that I've written. First, the creation of things, then paradise, and the third thing about heaven, death, if you want to, will come up. And it's 3 times with Wolf Elbroek. The first book, Am Anfang, the Schepping, the creation, was a success, translated in several languages. How cute God is, how cute creation was. And of course, I think about that when the second book appears, about paradise, about the man and woman living together and having problems with it. It's a problem for Wolf too. He can't do what he has done, as I can't do what I have written already. I have written another story, paradise story. So his illustrations are harsh, are sad in a way. The book is completely different. The publishing house says maybe it should be an adult book. Yes, I say, but thinking about Madonna, no, I say. When you treat children as human beings, you say to them, it's a trilogy. Sometimes it's difficult, sometimes it isn't difficult. I've written the Paradise story with short stories in it, like they run together, who will win, ha ha ha, 1 page long. The rest is more difficult if you want to. It's published as a trilogy for children and for adults too. And that's the way I like it to be. So when I have a connection with my translator, Emer talked about Mirjam Pressler. She has translated all of my books in German, 15 until now. We sat together in Frankfurt and at the book fair to work on one novel, Hornet's Nests, it's called in English. We sat together and I sensed at each moment, she's so good. She's so working with words, she understands my voice, and that's what it's all about. Not only my voice, but my sense of life, what I think about life. So please be my second self, Miriam. And this happens with some of the other translators with whom I have contact, with the French translator who has a lot of difficulties, because French is, well, it's difficult to make it into French. So he calls me up and changes names, but it's with the good meaning, let's say. But to make a long story short, I have to have this connection and then let loose. Of course it will not be my book. Of course things will happen. Oh, one stupid story. I will not mention the name. Kiss Me, one of my books is called Kiss Me. In Norwegian, Kyss me. This book is translated by a very well-known Norwegian author who was translating. And I was very proud, whoa, this author is translating me. And I led the 2 books together, the Dutch version, the Flemish version, and the Norwegian version, and went through it. Oh, look, this word is similar. Look, this word, how nice. And suddenly I see that 1 page is missing in the Norwegian version. I said, whoa, where's the page? And I called the publishing house, and that it seems to be that the translation was made out of the German. Ooh, a translation of a translation, very, very, very interesting. And that the translator had decided, well, this page, I don't understand really what happens because my books are not very, sometimes difficult to understand. Let's cut it. Oh, it's go right through. So these things happen and you have to live with it, but if you trust somebody, he or she will make the best of it, I presume.
Bart, Aidan, thank you very, very much. I mean, this conversation could go on a lot longer, I know. Please join me in thanking them. Aidan will be downstairs signing books, and I think Bart has one or two books in his back.
5 books with me, 5.
Form an orderly queue here to buy Bart's books.